About 3 billion years ago, the original photosynthesizing plants on Earth were one-celled organisms. These plants reproduced by mitosis, which is the splitting in half of a single cell producing two identical cells. Then about 2 million years ago, plants started reproducing using meiosis. Meiosis is where plants reproduce through each parent plant making a new cell with half of their DNA. In more detail, meiosis is plants still grew using mitosis, but when they wanted to reproduce a whole plant and not an individual cell, they used meiosis. This allowed larger plants to reproduce, another large plant instead of a small single-celled plant. Long ago, all plants only existed in the ocean. When all plants still existed in the ocean, plants raised their egg or sperm in the water and just hoped they would run into each other somewhere in the vast ocean. When plants started appearing on land, a plant developed a new technique to reproduce using spores. Spores worked well for plants such as ferns and moss. Spores contain both male and female reproductive organs, which then means they can reproduce on their own. It takes a plant less energy to reproduce using spores, but it needs to land on water to survive, so only primitive plants, such as algae, moss, and ferns, use this type of asexual reproduction. Spores must drop in an area that is warm, moist, and shaded. If the spore lands in a dry area, then it will die.
Water.
Only 1% of spores actually survive. Other 99% dies to the lack of water, nutrients, shade, or sunlight. Seeds evolved so plants could reproduce without landing in a wet, shady, warm area. Spores evolved to seeds through slowly moving away from bodies of water and onto the land. Hard covers were formed for the baby cells. This pairing became known as a seed. The seed recovering protects the baby cell from breaking and allows it to reproduce without landing in water.
Boom, 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 boom!
Seeds are transported in 3 different ways. The first way is they form stickers so that they stick to animals or anything traveling by and drop off later. Seeds also travel through the air. This type of seed is very aerodynamic and light. Lastly, seeds travel through hiding themselves in animals and being eaten. The seeds, however, do not get digested and are excreted out of the animal's body and dropped into a new area. When seeds settle in an area, if they have enough water and enough room to grow, they will germinate. The plant will then begin to become a seedling, and roots will grow. Another type of plant reproduction uses flowers and pollen to reproduce. In order for reproduction to take place, pollen grains from a male stamen must be carried to the female part of the flower, known as the pistil. Flowers are pollinated using 2 ways, insects and the wind. This process is called pollination, which leads to the making of 1 or more seeds in a flower. Insects like the bright petals and sweet smell of flowers. They land on the flower and drink the liquid inside called nectar. When the insect touches the stamen, pollen sticks to the insect. Then the pollen is transferred to the pistil of another plant as the insect flies around it. The wind picks up pollen from one plant and transfers it to another. Another important part of plant reproduction and the life cycle of a plant is alternation of generation. All plants go through a life cycle that takes them through both haploid and diploid generations. The multicellular diploid plant structure is called a sporophyte. Sporophytes produce spores through meiotic division. The multicellular haploid plant structure is called a gametophyte. A gametophyte is formed from a spore and gives rise to haploid gametes. Basically, alternation of generation is the changing between these diploid and haploid stages that occurs in plants.